for our second session of our MetaField educational series, this time going over our reports designer. This is Adam Jones with Agile Frameworks. To kind of give you a little bit of an intro, we appreciate everyone's attendance. Our first session going over Forms Designer went really, really well. We had some great feedback, had great attendance, and actually saw a good amount of new forms being developed in MetaField across our customer base. So we're really excited to offer this second session on Reports Designer and hope that this allows you to more robustly use MetaField and to add some more meaningful reports to your environment moving forward. So this time around, you'll have Joel Smolarek leading you along in the Reports Designer. He'll kind of run the show here. Just a couple housekeeping items, if I may, if we go on to the agenda here. So we'll get through our introductions. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of something we have coming up next week, our Customer Success and Product webinar. And then Joel will get into the deeper agenda here in just a moment. But Joel, if you can pop to the next slide quickly. So just want to go over next Thursday at 12 o'clock Central Time, so 10 o'clock to you folks on the West Coast, 1 o'clock for you folks on the East Coast. We're going to be having a webinar kind of in a series of webinars we've been having. This time we're going to go over customer success and MetaField 2.0. So we're going to give some update on changes that we've made to our implementation strategy in 2018. And then the big piece of this will be going over our new customer success program that we're going to be putting in place in 2019 and what that's going to mean for you as a customer in terms of interacting with us at Agile Frameworks and the value that you're going to get, something we're really, really excited about. So we'll be going over that. And then Bob Tuttle, our CEO, and Rob McConnell, our Chief Product Officer, will be going over our continued investment in the current version of the product, MetaField 1.0, and then an overview of some of the features to come in MetaField 2.0. So that'll be next Thursday. We very much encourage you to attend. You should have gotten an invite or yesterday morning. If you haven't, please reach out to your contact at Agile Frameworks and we'll make sure we get that to you. And I'm going to hand it over to Joel.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thanks Adam for the introduction. So I'm going to get out of the presentation here and open up MetaField. So as Adam said, this webinar is for Report Designer. So what I'm going to do is go through some high-level things regarding Report Designer. We'll actually do a report design using the form that was used in our last webinar, which was on Form Designer. Walk you through the whole process, some tips and tricks, things of that nature. And then we're going to get into configuring the discrepancy report as well. So we'll get into that. And then we'll hopefully have time at the end here for some questions. So if you have questions along the way, you can chat those questions within the webinar. We'll pick those questions up and then we'll try to answer them at the end. All right, so the first thing you want to do when you're starting a report is you'll want to go into activity administration. So I'm going to go into administration and then I'm going to open up the form that we were working on last time. So the form was in this observations and inspections group, and it was this observation form here. So I'm going to open up the observation form. Once the form opens, you'll see a button here along the right-hand side called Report Designer. And what you'll want to do is just click on that Report Designer button. If you don't have any report templates created for a form, it's going to say that this form's not used in any report, and you'll want to add a new report. If you have report templates assigned to that form, you'll see those reports listed here, and you can add more than one report template to a form design. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a new report. What you'll have to do when creating a report is give it a name, a code, and a default title. These are required fields for creating a report design. So I'll just call this report design webinar observation report. And it would help if I could spell. So I'm gonna duplicate the name and the title, and I'll just give it a code of WOR. Okay, and I'm gonna hit create. So now this report template is created, and what happens is you are taken to the report designer engine. So you'll see some common things across the engine here is you have some controls across the top. So this is the save button. You have an undo button here and a redo button here. You can change the layout of your report if it's a portrait or landscape layout, which would be best when you print it out. You can change that there, and then closes you out of Report Designer. You'll also notice that there's a few tabs on the right-hand side, one for elements, one for data sets, properties, and report settings. Report settings are the same settings that you have, plus a couple extras, but these are the same settings that you have for any of your discrete reports. So if you look at these will look really familiar. The ones that are different regarding the do-it-yourself reports here is you have the ability to see the number of elements. A key thing about the report design is this element count at this time needs to be below 500, and I'll talk about elements a little bit later. It'll also show you what type of report template this is, whether it's an activity, limbs, or safety. Those are the three areas where you can create do-it-yourself style report designs. And then you also have the ability to say if you want to have the system header that you see, it'll be very similar to the headers and footers that you see on the discrete reports, like the ones for concrete, grout and mortar, or density testing. Or you can choose to create a custom header, or you can choose no header or footer at all. So what the custom header is it allows you to basically design the header and footer just like you would design the report body. So once we kind of show you how to design the report body, you'll get the idea of how you can design a header and footer. So I'm just going to keep this at a system header and footer. Elements. Elements are those, I guess you would call them the tools within your toolkit, the tools that you can use to help design the report. And we'll go through these elements as we design the report. Data sets are different data sets that you can apply to the report design. So the majority of the data sets that you'll want to ever apply to a report design are the actual data that's on the form. So we created this report template based off of the observation form. So these are all the form fields on that observation form. If you remember last time, you can add data input fields that will never go on the report template. What we're talking about there is you have the ability to only put fields on the report template that you'd like to have on the report template. So for instance, if you did not want to track mileage or location, for instance, on the end deliverable that goes to your customers, you just leave that off the report template. It'll still be tracked within the form. Properties are, well, I can explain those more when we get into adding data sets, but properties are essentially the different properties that you can set against elements and data sets. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. The other thing that I want to make sure I do when doing the report design is have data handy for me in quality control, so I can preview the report design as I build it and actually see what that report looks like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this tab, and I'm going to go into quality control. So when we were doing the form design, we were actually doing the same thing. We were going into a form with data and we were showing it in quality control or in field to basically see what that form design looked like. We're going to do the same thing while we're building the report. So I'm going to search for that observation form. And all I want to do is I want to have data handy so I can go ahead and preview this report as I'm designing it. So I'll just be flipping back and forth between the pages. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about elements and what those do. So the most common element that you're going to use on a report design is the panel element. That's really the element that's essentially the building blocks of your reports. So I'm going to start with a panel, and that form, if you remember the form from last time, had some general information on it. It had some information regarding the observation that took place or the work that took place. There was some information on some remarks that were added to the form, as well as tracking discrepancies, images, and attachments. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to section off our report design with some of those things. So I'm going to add a few sections, and what I'm going to do is I have my panel here. I'm going to drag over a label element into the panel. Label elements can be a couple different things. They can be static labels that you add onto your report template that really don't change, or they can be dynamic and you can source fields on your form, and we'll get into that a little bit later. For this one, I want to just create a section header. So what I'm going to do is now click on that element, the label element, and I'm going to go into the properties. And you'll see the text by default is content. What I'm going to do is change this to general information. Okay, and as you can see with label elements, there's some things that I can do with label elements. So one thing you can do is bold it. You could also make it italic. You can underline it. I could even change the font color of the font in the element. So those are all things that you can do within a label element. I could also make it a superscript or subscript. All of those things you can do with a static label element. In this case, I just want to make it bold. I also want to align it by the center. So I'm going to make this center aligned, and I'm going to change the font size because I want it a little bigger than 9-point font. So I'm going to up the font size to 16. Some of those things you can also do up here. As you can see, when I clicked on the label element, I also get some controls up here. So just note that sometimes when you click on elements, you'll get additional controls up on the top here. All right, so that's that section. The other thing that I want to do is I want to actually wrap that section in a panel, because I'm going to put a bunch of other elements in that section. So actually, let me move that out of the panel here. So some of the other data sets that I want to grab and drop into this general information section are, there's a couple ways to find your data sets from the form fields that you want to put on the report template. By default, they're going to be sorted alphabetically. You can also sort them by form order. So I'm going to sort them by form order because that's a little bit easier for me to deal with here. Okay, so there's a bunch of general information fields on the form that I want to have on my report design. And I want to actually, so to limit the amount of white space on the report, I really want to put these fields in 2 different columns. So one way to do that is to bring in panels. And if I click on that panel that I just brought in and go to the properties, you'll see there's a width property. If I set the width to 50%, it's going to make that panel 50% of the panel that it's inside. So this panel here represents 100% of the page, and then this panel here that I just put in there represents 50% of what's within this panel. So to make the second column, I'm going to bring another column or panel in here, and I'm going to also make that one 50% of the width. And now you can see I have 2 columns of data that I'll be presenting on my report. So there's a couple ways to actually bring field data onto a report, and I'll show you both ways. So on the left column, I'm going to bring over activity number. I'm going to bring over date. I'm going to bring over weather. And when I bring over weather, since it's a pick list, there's a couple different ways I can display a pick list. I can display it as a checkbox with a vertical orientation, a checkbox with a horizontal orientation, or a list, which is just showing the value. So I'm going to choose list in this case. Okay, and then the last one that I want to bring over is this weather other field. Okay, if I can get it in here. All right. So I have all the fields that I want on the left side of the column. One thing that I want to draw your attention to is when I dragged and dropped those fields onto the report design, if I look at the properties within the panel, you'll see that by default, there is a height expression tied to that, that panel. So a height expression works, think of it like those visualization rules that you use on the form, where you can use an expression to say whether you want to visualize a field on a form. You can use the same type of expressions to say whether you want to hide a field or an element on a report. So think of it like you're using visualization rules, but these rules on the report side are hiding those elements from the report design. So basically by default, you're going to have a height expression tied to a panel that you drag onto a report using the drag and drop method, which I just showed. It's going to be the if empty statement. So this is showing that if the activity number equals an empty value, it's going to hide that panel from the report design. So that's the most common, I would say, hide expression used is this if empty expression. So you'll want to note that, because if you want all of these panels to display, regardless of whether or not there's data in the form field, you'll want to go in here and remove this hide expression. So now that hide expression is removed. So one other thing to note is when you're designing a report, you're going to want to save your report design. It's just a lot easier that way. If you go and you preview a report and it doesn't look right, if you save and kind of test out your report design early and often, you'll kind of know what you did last that caused it to behave that way, and you can change it back. Versus trying to go through the whole thing, and then you're not sure what configuration you did caused something to happen. So I always recommend saving often. Okay. The other way to do the same thing that I did here is to actually build it from scratch. So you can drag over your element, your panel element, like I did here, and then you can bring in two label elements. So if I want to bring over the form field that was for the technician or inspector, one thing that I can do is I can just label the one field here. I can change this from technician, or from content to technician. Okay, and maybe I want to bold this as well. And instead of doing 100% of the width, I'm just going to remove this, and when you remove it, it's going to auto size the width for you. And for content, for the other label element, I will want to, rather than using a static label, I'll actually want to source this to a field from the form. So that's where I can select a data set and the form field that I want to source this from. And it'll basically mimic the same thing that I get here, which is a dynamic label element sourced to a form field. So I'm going to, instead of having this be a static label element, I'm going to source this to the observation form field, and I am going to find that field on the observation form. So it is right here, technician. Okay, and I'm going to make this width, I'm going to change that from 100% to auto as well. And basically, you see the same thing that we got here from a drag and drop method from the method that I use sourcing it myself. Okay, so to quickly get the other elements on here that I want, I'm just going to pull over the certification number field. And I'm going to pull over the technician, or sorry, the temperature field. Okay, so basically those are the fields that I want on the general information section of this form. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go into where I have the actual data, and what we can do is we can preview the report design from here. So here you go. That you can basically see that report design that I just created. You see the title that I gave the report, the general information section, and the fields that I put on here. Okay. So let's continue building this out. I also want to create a section for my site observations. So I'm going to add a panel and go down and add the label element. And we'll call this element site observations. I'm going to also make this bold font. I'm going to center align it, and I'm going to change the font size to 16 so it looks similar to my general information section above here. And for site observations, I want to bring a couple other fields in here. So for data sets, I'm going to bring over my work performed data set. Again, I have some options for how I want to render that because it's a pick list. I'm going to just bring it over as, actually, let's remove that and we'll bring that over as a checklist so you'll see how that looks. I'll do that. And there's also another field called work performed if other. And here's where a good example of where it's nice to have that hide expression, because maybe you only want to visualize this work performed if other, if there's actually data in this field. So that's a good example of where you would use that hide expression. Okay. I'm also going to add another panel, and I'm just going to quickly add some more stuff to kind of move us along here. I'm going to add a section called remarks. I'm going to bold that. I'm going to make that this 16-point font as well, and I'm going to align it to the center. Underneath there, I'm going to find my remarks data sets here. So we'll just move these in here. And I had another one down here called general remarks. Okay, so I have my remarks in place. The next one I'm going to do is for our discrepancies data grid that's on the form. So I'm going to pull that over, and data grid values, actually when you pull it over, there's a couple different options that you can display data grids as. You can display them as a vertical table, which is a table that you're used to seeing. It's a grid style design. Your column headers are basically the fields that are collected on the form. A horizontal table is the same thing as a vertical table. It's just flipped 90 degrees. So your column headers are actually within the first row. So the fields on your form are actually the first row the first column in a horizontal table. And as you add records, it will build out to the right from left to right versus from top to bottom. So those are some orientations, and I can choose vertical table, and you'll kind of see what that looks like. If I remove that and I pull over discrepancies and make it a horizontal table, you can see what that looks like. So that's the horizontal orientation. In this case, I'm going to keep the discrepancies in the list view, which is the panel style. All right, so those are the discrepancies. That's the discrepancy data grid that I just added. One thing that I'll want to do is I want to keep this column header the same as before. So I'll make that 16-point font so it's similar to remarks and the other headings. Okay. There's a couple other things that I want to do, and I want to add my images data grid as well. And finally, I want to add the attachment field. So I'm going to go down here and add the attachment field. So basically, I have all the fields that I wanted to add to my report template on the design now. One thing that I still need to do here is update this. Okay, so that's 16. This looks like it's a little redundant, so I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to delete it. So that gets removed from the report template, and I'm going to save it. So now that's all done. What I want to do is preview and see what my report template looks like. So when I preview this, couple of things that I notice. I see a lot of white space on my report. It's a lot of white space and a lot of just white. So some things that that I might want to do to my report design is actually add some color to this thing. So to add color, it's pretty easy. You can go to any element on a report, any panel element. If I go to the properties, you'll see that there's this property setting called background color. You can either pick a color from a color picker here. So if I click on this little icon here, I can basically go through a color picker and I can pick a color. You can also type in a hex code. So if you work with your marketing department or whoever has designed the branding for your company, what you can do is get hex codes and you can just type in those hex codes. So I'm going to use a hex code from one of our Agile Frameworks brandings, which is this blue color, and I'll put that hex code in, and that will change. Let's see here. Let me wipe this out. All right. Let me save this and let's see if it comes through. There we go. So if I preview the report again, you should see that color branding now in that area. And you can see that there. So the other thing is you see by default, the discrepancies data grid shows some borders here. And I think that actually looks pretty nice. So what I want to do is actually add some borders into these sections of my report template so they look similar to this discrepancies data grid. To add a border onto a report design, that's very simple as well. You simply select the panel that you want to wrap a border around, and then you'll see in the properties here, there is a border property, and you can just change that to add borders. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add some borders to some of these report elements. What I'm doing now, since I have the baseline of that report design on here, what I'm really doing is I'm going through this and I'm looking for things that look a little funny. It's basically just tightening up that report design at this point. Okay, so I've added all those borders. I'm going to save that. And then what I also want to do to have the background color be consistent for all of my headers here, or headings, section headings, I'm going to add that to the background color property. So we'll do that for site observations. We'll do it for remarks. We'll do it for discrepancies. And we'll do it for images. Okay. So now let's look at what that report design is starting to shape up to be. Okay, so now it's starting to look like a pretty nice report. The one thing that I notice here is these images are taking up a lot of space on the report. So maybe I want to kind of make these images a little bit smaller, have them take up a little more space. A good way to do that in Report Designer is to actually click on the panel that all your images are in. There's a property here. Let me find it. Called repeat panel as a column. So if I want to repeat this as 3 columns, you saw that there were 3 images loaded onto the form. I can set this to 3 columns here, and if I apply that property and then rerun the report, we'll see that those images are now put in 3 different columns. So we were able to take up a lot of white space there. So a couple of other things that I'm noticing here is it looks like this attachment field here. It looks like that is on the page before the actual attachment. It's probably due to this attachment being a large image, which is not allowing it to be on the same page as the actual image. So what you can do for that is you can actually apply a page break. So that's another report element. What you do is you just drag the page break over, and that'll force a page break between that attachment section and the rest. Okay. Another thing that you might want to use specifically for fields where you have some variable data is you might want to use the property that's called keep together. So what keep together does is it tries to keep all of those, all the contents within that panel on one page, and it'll force a page break if it doesn't, rather than having some of the contents be on the first page and other contents being on another page. You can use this keep together property. Okay. All right, and then the last thing that I want to do with this is maybe for discrepancies, for the status of a discrepancy, I want to call out that status in red. So I'm going to apply the font color of red for this status label. Let's see. There we go. So now the status label is red on the report. And one more time, let's preview that report to see some of those changes that we made. So as you can see, now this is actually starting to look like something that looks more like a deliverable that can go out to a client. We have branding, the color of the Agile Frameworks logo here on the report design. We have borders. We're keeping panels together. We have images that have a page break between them. So the labels of the field is not on a different page than the image itself. So this is actually a report that I would be, I would be happy with sharing with one of my clients. That's pretty much it for the report designer and the report designer engine. The next thing that I want to show you is the report designer for the discrepancy report, which is a little bit different. So the first thing you want to do when you create a discrepancy report is you're going to want to actually go into an area within administration. It's in activity here, and then search results display. Within the search results display, there's an area called discrepancy report. What you'll want to do is the discrepancy report for your environment is probably going to have some preloaded values in here. If I actually look at all fields, you'll see that there's a lot more than just the ones that you saw on the screen. So what you're going to want to do is inactivate some of these discrepancy fields that you're not using, and you're going to want to add fields that you want on your discrepancy report that you added to the form that are not in this display area. This is going to allow me to source those fields onto the discrepancy report design. So in this case, I have form activity number, the activity date, location, discrepancy number, description. All of these fields exist on that observation form. And I want to have these in this display area so I can put them on the actual discrepancy report design. So once you have your discrepancy report display area configured, you can go into the report template. Report template is within admin under reports here, and then by clicking on report types, we'll get into the area where all of my report templates reside. The activity discrepancy report type is within the activity reports here. You see it right here. It's this activity discrepancy report type. If I scroll all the way down here, that report that I just created, the webinar observation report, is down here at the bottom. So when you create a report template, it's also going to be in this area of report types. So to edit my discrepancy report, I'm going to click on Edit in Report Designer. And it's going to open up the same report designer that you saw before. This is just an example of something that I preloaded in here before the demo, but creating your discrepancy report is much like creating your report design for your form. The difference being the data set for your discrepancies is the data set that I just configured in that display area. So if I open up one of these discrepancy data grids, you'll see that these are the fields that I loaded onto that report or that display area. So in here, I have my open discrepancies, which is this data set right here, this open discrepancy data grid already applied to the report. I want to do the same thing for the closed discrepancies. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply drag and drop those like I dragged and dropped other data grids on the report design before. So I'm going to keep it with the panel orientation, and you'll see now I have the closed discrepancy data grid on the report. Now on here, it's also going to bring through, you'll notice a bunch of fields on here. Some of those fields are fields that I inactivated. What you can do is just go in and select those individual fields, and you can delete them from this data set. So now you just have the fields that are active on your form. Okay, I'm gonna save that. And to preview your report design for the discrepancy report, you can simply do that in quality control like we did before. So if I go home into quality control and activity, and I open up the project that we were looking at before, there's a discrepancy report button. So I'll open up the discrepancy report. I can select these discrepancies and I can preview the report. So just like in when we were configuring the report design for the observation report, I can also tweak the report design for the discrepancy report, and then I can simply preview the discrepancy report to see how that's looking. All right, and then one final thing that I want to talk about besides the design of the reports is the kind of the what you can do a little bit from the maintenance side of things in that admin page. So if I go back into the report types admin page, you'll see that I have a couple of controls over here for my report types. Let's scroll down to my webinar observation report. So there's a couple things that I can do. I can click on this button. I can see who created the report, when it was created, if it was modified, who it was modified by, and when it was modified. So you see those throughout the system. I can also copy the report template. So if you need to make multiple report templates for a single form, an easy way to do that is create a baseline report template and then use this copy feature, and that will essentially just clone the report template. And then you can have multiple report templates created for a single form, and you can tweak them. Where that's used commonly is, for example, in lab testing, to have lab reports where maybe one report template is for an ASTM and another report template is for an AASHTO. Okay. I can also go right into the report designer from here by clicking this button. I can delete a report template if I design something, I decided I don't like it anymore, I can delete it. Or if there's already reports created against that report template, MetaField's not going to let me delete that report template. So it's going to allow me to, but it'll allow me to deactivate it. I can deactivate it from here as well. All right, well, that is all for the Reports Designer webinar. I hope you guys learned a lot.